Welcome to session 5 of our small group series, Antidote for Self, in which we have been preaching through humility and reading through a book called Humility, The Joy of Self-Forgetfulness by Gavin Ortlund. In chapter 5 is titled A Humility Among Peers, which is the broadest of all of the chapters, talking about humility and envy and some other specific things in terms of horizontal relationships. So relationships among people who have no authority and no dependence. So not your kids, not your boss, but rather just all of the relationships in your life, and really taking a deep dive into envy particularly. So let's start with question 1 in our group, and that is this. Explain to one another why the book would call envy the fruit of pride. Why would we call envy the fruit of the tree of pride? That's in the beginning of the chapter. Go ahead and pause this recording and talk about that for just a minute. Welcome back. If envy is, and I'm using a quote that was used in the book, if envy is the sorrow at another's good, if envy is that, then why is envy a better opposite of love than, say, hate? I think in normal conversation, we would say, what's the opposite of love? You'd say hate. But the book says, no, the opposite of love is envy. Because if you are sad when someone else is happy, or happy when they're sad, right, then it is the opposite of love. So spend a little bit of time and talk about this idea that envy could be the opposite of love, and maybe give some examples of how you've seen that and why that might be applicable in the practical things that you've seen, instances that you've seen in your life. Go ahead and pause and talk about that for a moment. Welcome back. I'd like you to spend just a couple moments considering and then sharing how might be a good way to recognize in your own life if envy is building in you. So the book talks about some various different ways, but it also talks about how subtle and sneaky and under the surface the envy can be. That when we're envious, we often don't know it. So I'd like you to just discuss amongst your group, what are some things that would be red flags or maybe yellow flags that would tell you, hey, I might be suffering from some envy when it comes to this particular situation or relationship. Go ahead and pause the recording and chat about that for a moment. Welcome back. There's a wonderful phrase in the section of chapter 5 called Feast Upon the Gospel, where it talks about the gospel for each of us being like a small, peaceful garden that any time in the chaos of life we can go and spend time in. And so my question for you is this. That's a wonderful analogy, and that's wonderful in theory. But practically in your day-to-day life, do you think that the gospel is a little peaceful garden for you? Is it a place that on a daily basis, in the chaos of life, in the midst of those things, in the storms, you're consistently able to go to? And if the answer is no, how might you begin to use the gospel in that way? And if the answer is yes, what is it that you do particularly? What are the elements of the gospel? What are the practical things that you do that help you sit in the gospel the way you would sit in a peaceful garden in order to center yourself in the middle of chaos? Go ahead and pause and just talk about that for a few moments. Welcome back. Question 5 in the discussion for this session is this. How are humility and envy discussed? So how would we think about humility and how would we think about envy in the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 12? So what I'd like you to do, have someone grab a Bible. It's going to take a moment. Read through 1 Corinthians chapter 12, because in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul is writing to a church that is suffering from a lot of envy. Therefore, let's read what he has to say, and then I'd like you to talk about these two elements, true humility among peers and envy among peers, in the context of what the Apostle Paul and Scripture say about the church. Pause read that and discuss. Welcome back. For the end of our session, I'd like you to finish with the questions that are at the end of chapter 5 and then spend some time praying for one another. Again, one of the things that I'd like you to do each week is talk about something that you've committed to work on and apply in your life that you're working on right now and that your group is holding you accountable for and following up on. And secondly, what's something that you've realized over the course of this session or this series that you need help with? Share that in the context and privacy of your group, being open and vulnerable, and allow your group to encourage you. I love you, and we'll talk to you in the next session.